yeah, they're, independent of each other, alright? That's a good way to show independence, is oblique motion. Contrary motion is probably about as independent as you can get of a type of motion. It's probably one of the best as far as counterpoint goes, because you have one voice moving in one direction and the other voice moving in the opposite direction. So in this case, the top is moving up and the bottom voice is moving down. You could have them moving inwards as well. That would be contrary motion. Again, probably the best type of motion for independence. Similar motion is very common, a little less independent, but still good, meaning they're moving in the same direction, but they don't move at the same interval. So like this top voice here in this example is moving down by step. And the bottom voice is moving down by a fourth, or a skip. So we have similar motion. That motion, again, is fine, it serves its purpose, maybe not quite as independently, but it's still good, you use that quite a bit. Parallel motion, probably the least independent type of motion, but again, it's still good to have. Parallel motion is fine, although there's certain types of parallel motion that we'll get to that are not as good. But in this case then, what makes it parallel different than similar is that they're both moving both voices are moving in the same direction and they both move at the same interval. So you have the top voice moving by step and the bottom voice moving by step. Now notice like the interval here, A to C, is a minor third. This interval here, G to B, is a major third. That doesn't matter, it's the fact that they're both moving in thirds. So the quality of the interval really doesn't matter as much as the quantity. So the fact that they're moving in the same direction by the same interval, that's what makes it parallel motion. So we have 5 types of motion. All of them are good. So there's nothing, again, nothing wrong with all of them. The only one, though, that we are going to spend a little bit more time with is this one called parallel motion. Because there's a couple caveats with parallel motion. Yeah, if we want to just take a quick look at this example here. They're showing you now, well, in a 3-part structure, you have 3 voices. We have the voice pair of the bass, well, here we go, soprano and alto. So we have the soprano alto a 6th part, and they move in the same direction, and they maintain that interval of 6. So that would be called parallel motion. Then we have the soprano and the bass. They're both at C's, so they're at octaves apart, but then the soprano moves down to a B, and the bass moves up to a G, which is a 3rd apart. So they're moving in opposite directions, which gives you contrary motion. And then your alto and the bass. C and an E is a 3rd apart, E moves down to a D, bass moves up to a G, now they're a 5th apart, so again, contrary motion, opposite direction. Okay. Two types of parallel motion that we're gonna try to avoid. Call this objectionable parallels. Why? It's because a perfect 5th or perfect octave in parallel motion does not give the sound of any kind of independence at all. If you have 2 voices that are octave apart, say you have an alto or a soprano moving up to a B, and you have it from an A to a B, and a tenor moving from an A to a B. they're the same notes, right? Just octaves apart, or an octave apart, but they're still the same two notes. So it's the same melody. This isn't any kind of independence at all. This is exactly what we're trying to avoid. We want to give every voice part their own melody, so we want them to be totally, as much as we can, different from any other voice part. So when you have two voices that are octaves apart, they're singing the same two notes, right? The thing about fifths, say if we had D in the bass, or in the tenor, and an E. So now distance from D to A is a fifth. The distance from E to B is a fifth. Fifths, perfect fifths are very, have an open sound. Very, like, unique, well not unique, but very, clear sound, like you would notice it right away. And if you have voices moving in parallel motion at fifths apart, it's very common to hear that in, say, Renaissance music and music of the Middle Ages, but not in tonal music. It was a sound that most Baroque composers avoided altogether, because again, the relationship between an octaves and fifths, they're like our core integral part of our, trying to explain this without getting too technical, but when you think of our overtone system and our harmonics, the first one you get is an octave, the next one you get is a fifth. So it's like, it's almost like that sound is already there, and we don't need to highlight it in this style of music. The Baroque composers were trying to avoid highlighting that sound. So, objectional parallel results when two parts are separated by a perfect fifth or perfect octave, or by their octave equivalents, meaning if you have A in the bass and A in the soprano, B in the bass and B in the soprano, they're more than an octave apart, but they're still the same two. We would still reduce them to an octave, and so this is still parallel motion happening here. Yes. So parallel motion is only bad at this point when we're using parallel perfect fifths or parallel perfect octaves. See, it says here let's see, the authors write the perfect octave, perfect fifth are the most stable intervals, and to link two voices through parallel motion at such intervals interferes with their independence much more than would parallel motion of thirds or sixths. So again, parallel thirds, or the example I gave you before, it just sounds like the lower voice is sort of harmonizing the top voice. Or if we have sixths, or if we have octaves, they're not really in harmony anymore, or even like this. It creates just the sound that doesn't fit with what we're going for right now. So here's some examples. No. Here we go. So, example A. Between the soprano and the alto, they're moving in parallel motion. It's moving down, both parts are moving down a step, but the interval that they start off with is a sixth, and then they move again both by steps, so they're still at a sixth apart, and they both move up by steps, so they're still at a sixth apart. So this type of parallel motion is okay, parallel sixth. But in the bass and the tenor, they're fifth apart, perfect fifth, and then when they move to the next voice, or to the next chord, they're still at a fifth apart, perfect fifth apart. So what we have here is objectionable parallel motion, parallel fifths, right? And then they move down again and maintain the interval of a fifth. Again, parallel fifths, and that's what we're trying to avoid. Now all together. Doesn't sound that bad. And especially on the piano, it wouldn't sound that bad. But if you had your voice like choir here singing, and you isolated just the tenor and the bass together, and you heard that sound, it's a very exposed sort of sound. Very, again, kind of unique. That openness sound, that's again what we're trying to avoid. We want with the harmony to be fuller. So we would try to avoid doing that. That would be wrong to do in our chorale type setting. The example here has the soprano and the bass moving in the same direction at the same interval, and they start off in octaves and they end up in octaves, and then they once again move back to octaves first. So you get this What kind of motion is between the bass and the tenor? Contrary motion. What about the bass and the alto? Similar motion. They're at a fifth, and then they move to a third, and then what type of motion happens on the next beat? Contrary motion. Alto's moving up, bass moving down. We already have the bass and the soprano. What about the tenor and the alto? What type of motion? Contrary, and then what type of motion? Parallel. So then I'd have to say, look, a little bit deeper. Are these parallel fifths or octaves? No, this is a six, and this is a six. So it's a parallel six. Tenor and soprano. There's moving down, soprano's moving up. Contrary. Tenor's moving up, soprano's moving down. Also contrary. Soprano and alto. Similar, and then contrary. So that's what your assignment's going to be, is looking at these and all the voice pairs. It seems like a lot of work right now, like all these voice pairs. There's only 6. Once you start to do it, it gets quick, it gets easier and easier, and you get quicker at it. But right now, it kind of feel like a overwhelming task. Now here we don't have any objectionable parallel motion. We do have parallel thirds, but thirds are okay. All we're looking out for that's bad at this point is parallel octaves or parallel fifths. And so like the bass and the tenor, why the tenor is way up here, I'm not sure. B to F sharp, that's a fifth. So in my mind, going to the next chord, I'm gonna like red flag, that's a fifth. Do they stay a fifth apart? And when I look, no, the bass moves up and the tenor stays, so that's oblique motion. Oblique motion's okay, there's nothing wrong with oblique motion. And then it happens again. Between the bass and the alto, they're at octaves. All right, now if they maintain an octave when they move, then we have problems. But bass moves up a fifth, alto moves down, so it's contrary motion, we're good. So then it's back. And then the bass and the soprano are third apart, fifth apart, contrary motion again. And I would go through again, every voice pair that same way, looking for any types of parallel motion. And if it's a parallel octave or parallel fifth, then I know I got what we're trying to avoid, but the book sometimes does this a couple, there's a few times that it makes sense. What we're doing right now is we're finding the errors. The next chapter, when we get into that, we'll learn how to, like, as composers, to avoid those errors altogether. But what we have to do is kind of like figure out what we're trying to avoid, and so that's what we're doing right now. We're learning what not to do, I guess. Yeah.
I think the absence of number, when parallel fifths and eighths were their octave equivalents, that's moving compound fifths?
Yeah.
Or
Yep.
two octave separation areas,
Yep.
or unisons for that.
Exactly, unisons also. Yep. Yeah, it says although such parallel regained acceptance in the 20th century. So again, if you're writing music in the 20th century, or if you're writing music for instrumental, you'll find a lot of like parallel motion. You know, you might get that in, or like between the basses and the cellos in an orchestra, like this big, heavy, low octaves, and that's fine. I mean, there's definitely a purpose for that. For this particular style of writing that we're doing right now, composers in the Baroque period avoided doing that. Generally followed the convention dating from around 1450 of avoiding parallel fifths and octaves, as well as their octave equivalents, such as twelfths and unisons, as we mentioned. Again, note this does not rule out duplication of the octave, which is common in orchestral writing, where the bass line is doubled between the cellos and like that you'd see that happen. Again, reason for avoiding parallel fifths, and that has to do with the nature of counterpoint. Fifths and octaves are the most stable of intervals, and that's what we're trying to avoid, that particular sound, that openness of sound. So hopefully, I kind of went a roundabout way of explaining it, but hopefully it makes a little more sense. It didn't make a lot of sense to me when I was a freshman in college. I was like, why are we trying to avoid this? But hopefully I explained it a little bit, like, hearing it definitely, I feel like makes sense. When you hear parallel fifths, just a really unique sort of sound. Again, kind of reminiscent of Renaissance music, but we're past that. We're in the Baroque period, they were trying to avoid that sound. Yes?
Examples is the septic parallel thirds and sixths. About fourths, parallel fourths.
Those can be, they do have a very unique sound, and also kind of a sound that you want to avoid. And what the book says right now, good question, because we're trying to get away, is that when you have that parallel motion of a fourth between the bass and another voice, we would try to avoid that. Right now, we're not gonna worry so much about that one, but yes, the fourths are also kind of that, I don't wanna say ugly interval, because it's actually pretty cool sounding interval, but for this type of writing, it works a little bit better because it can get blended in, the fourth does, as opposed to the perfect parallel, the perfect fifths. So, good question. Alright, so, one way, let's say we have parallel fifths, between our bass, our tenor and our soprano here. I wrote this example. We got E to A, which is a fifth, E to D, which is a fifth. You're like, okay, I'll fix that. Instead of going up to E, I'll go down to E. There. Did I really change the sound much? Still going to the same note, right? But instead of parallel motion, now I have contrary motion. So I'm like, I fixed it. I got contrary motion. But there's still, this is still a perfect fifth, and this is still a perfect fifth. So the next type of motion that is gonna be called objectionable. Contrary fifths and contrary octaves, which I still call parallel, even though they're not moving in parallel motion, it's like the same thing though, right? You're not really hiding it or fooling anybody. In this example here, we have parallel fifths between our bass and our tenor. The fifth part, they're moving at a fifth apart. Here, they're an octave and a fifth apart, we would still call it perfect fifth. And they move in the opposite direction, and they're still a fifth apart. So even though they're moving in contrary motion, it's still essentially what? Like parallel fifths. It doesn't change the sound at all. So if you have right, that's an A, and a B, it does this. Changes the sound a little bit, but still you get a fifth to a fifth, and that's what we're trying to avoid. And it would be the same for an octave to an octave, or say an octave to a unison. If you had soprano moving up to a B, and say bass moving up to a B, so we're parallel octaves. So instead, we could do it with the alpha. Let's do this one. So we have parallel octaves. Maybe to avoid that, like, all right, we'll move the alpha up and have it jump down like that. You have unison to octaves. You still like the unison and an octave are equivalent to each other. It's still the same note. A and A, B and B. That's what it boils down to. Even though we're jumping with that. It's in contrary motion. It's still the same thing as what we just experienced with parallel motion. Right? So that's contrary fifths, contrary octaves. All right. Unequal fifths. This is where it gets really fun. All right. So we have parallel perfect fifths. Right? Parallel, like two voices moving in the same direction, a fifth apart. Unequal fifths, though, is when you have a perfect fifth that's followed by a diminished fifth, or say a diminished fifth that's followed by a perfect fifth. Like, that's not two parallel perfect fifths, that's a diminished fifth to a perfect fifth. So, composers during the Baroque period weren't always doing the similar thing here when it came to this particular set of intervals. But what the authors and historians have found, that there was some things that they, for the most part, kind of did, so we are going to make this a certain rule here. So apparently some tone composers avoided unequal fifths involving the bass, and others used the perfect fifth to a diminished fifth, but they did not use the diminished fifth to a perfect fifth. So they went from a perfect fifth to a diminished fifth, but they didn't go a diminished fifth to a perfect fifth. Yet neither of these restrictions holds true for tonal music in general. So they're saying some composers did, some composers didn't, and there's not like a set way. For the purposes of our class though, we'll consider unequal fifths acceptable. So this is okay to do, unless it involves a diminished fifth to a perfect fifth between the bass and another voice. So when you're looking for unequal fifths that are bad, it's going to be a diminished fifth to a perfect fifth, and it has to be, one of the voices has to be in the bass. It has to be a bass, and it can be bass in soprano, bass in alto, or bass in tenor, but it has to be bass. So it kind of boils down the amount of voice carrying to 3. voice pairs, bass and tenor, bass and alto, bass and soprano, as opposed to all six. So the example of this, between our alto and our tenor is a perfect fit. And then they move in the same direction by step to a diminished fifth from D to F. Back up. This is all good. We're saying good because it doesn't include the bass at all. So we have unequal fifths happening. Fine. It can happen in the inner voices because it's sort of more or less disguised and it's not drawn up. Another example here, we have a perfect fifth between our bass and our soprano, and it moves to a diminished fifth, B to F, between our bass and our soprano. Again, they're saying this is good because it's a perfect fifth to a diminished fifth, and in that case it's fine. What we're trying to avoid is the diminished fifth to a perfect fifth when you have the bass in any one of these top voices. In this case it's the soprano, could be the alto, could be the tenor, but in this case it's soprano. B to F is a diminished fifth, A to E is a perfect fifth. Now again, me playing them, I don't think we're going to hear a whole lot of offensive material, but it was just something that composers mostly avoided. And so that's what we're going to try to do as well, to write in this style. So the first example, again, we have the inner voice. Because again, they're in the inner voices, you don't even really hear the. Right. The second one you'll hear a little bit clearer because it's in the outer voices. There you get it. Now the third one, the one we're trying to avoid, hear how that almost wants, you hear that interval, it wants to almost want to hear it go that way. Instead it's going this way. And it's a little less, there's a little more dissonant of the sound. That is the overall, I know it's a lot to take in, a lot to remember. Do the best you can. Maybe highlight this page because you'll have to come back to it when you're asked to find unequal fifths, unacceptable unequal fifths. You're like, what are unacceptable unequal fifths? And remember Mr. Worth's talking about, but I have no clue. I'll be there with you. I'm like, yes, I won't remember this, but mark it in that page, and you'll have to come back to it over the course of the next week a few times until it starts to sink in, maybe a little bit more. At least it didn't sink in right away for me. Maybe it will. So unacceptable. This is just the definition of what unequal fifths are. Unacceptable unequal fifths. The actual definition is down here. So we will consider unequal fifths acceptable unless, right here, diminished fifth to a perfect fifth between the bass and another voice. Right there. That's, if you're going to highlight anything in your book, like for this section, highlight that, because that's your definition right there of unacceptable unequal fifths. Alright, the last little thing that we're trying to avoid. Again, this one's a tricky one too because there's a lot of steps. It's called a direct or hidden octave. okay? What, alright, so we're in agreement that that perfect octave, perfect fifth is a sound that we're gonna try to avoid, right? But sometimes that sound will come up even when it's not in parallel motion, but it almost gets highlighted. And it's gonna, what two voices did I say are the most, our ears are usually drawn to out of the four voices?
The soprano.
Soprano and bass, right? So, a direct octave or fifth is only gonna happen in the outer parts. Okay? So it's gonna appear, even though they're not moving in parallel motion, it's gonna give the sound as if it is a parallel octave, and so that's why this rule is here. It gives that sound as if it's a parallel octave or parallel fifth, but it's actually not a parallel octave or parallel fifth. So it results when the outer parts move in the same direction. So they're moving in similar motion, not parallel motion, moving in similar motion into a perfect octave or perfect octave, perfect fifth, with a leap in the soprano part. And that's what really brings this particular mistake, if you want to call it mistake, out. Because the soprano is leaping into it. And with that big leap, it draws the attention to the soprano, and when the soprano lands on a note that is an octave away from the bass, it'll give the impression that we have parallel octaves, or kind of that, bring out that octave sound that we're trying to avoid, or perfect fifth sound that we're trying to avoid. So, really, there's three things that you have to remember with this one definition. The only voice pair that you have to look for or be like concerned is the soprano and the bass. So step one is only going to happen between the soprano and bass. Step two, they're going to be moving in the same direction. So if it's a soprano and bass and they're both moving in the same direction, we have step two. Step three is that final note that they land on is an octave or a fifth. And actually step four, the soprano is leaping into it. Yes.
When they say leaping, anything more than a step?
Yes. Then again, the confusion between a leap and a skip, it should really be a skip or a leap. Yes. Anything more than a step. In the soprano part. The bass can move by step, or the bass can skip, it doesn't matter. But if the soprano is skipping or leaping, then we will have a direct octave or a direct fifth. A third or more, not a second. Second is just a step. Yeah.
Can you define again the distinction between skip and leap?
What I call a skip is an interval of a third or a fourth. Anything more than a fourth, I'm going to call a leap. In this case, it really should just be with a skip or more. Like skip or leap. So they kind of sum up what I just said, though, here, maybe more succinctly. The oral, meaning what you hear, result is similar to parallel fifths and parallel octaves. The interval of a perfect fifth or perfect octave between the outer voices is approached from the same direction, and with that leap in the soprano, it brings it out. It brings the attention to your ears, and it gives that sound of a perfect fifth or perfect octave that we're trying to avoid. The fifth involves the bass, and that's talking about the actual examples. So the examples that they give you. Alright, so we have our bass, our soprano, bass on an E, soprano on a C, that's a 6. The bass moves down by step to a D, soprano moves to an A, that's a perfect fifth. It's similar motion, so everything looks good. Problem is though, is that it's the bass and the soprano, they're moving in the same direction. Soprano is, in this case, skipping down to the A, and the resulting interval is a perfect octave. Or, I'm sorry, perfect fifth. Kind of brings that perfect fifth up. Here we have a direct octave, the soprano, or the bass on a C, soprano on an E, that's a third. But then when they move, they're moving in the same direction, bass on a G, soprano on a G, so they move into the perfect octave, moving in the same direction, and the soprano again is skipping into it. E to G is a skip up. As soon as they hit that octave, it's like very exposed sounding. Like the E is, it's in harmony, right? And then all of a sudden, they're on the same note. That again, that, and because the soprano is leaping into it, it draws attention to that sound, like right away. Even though the bass is leaping more, and the bass, like here, the bass is moved by step. It does, like bass can move by step or leap, but because it's the soprano part that we're more concerned about. Here we have the bass on an A, alto on a C, bass on a D, alto on an A. That's a perfect fifth. They're moving in the same direction, alto skipping. Why are they saying it's good though? Because it's the alto and not the soprano. So just kind of throwing you off here, but yes. And then letter D, we have the bass moving up. G to C, G to B is a third, and now they're at octaves. So we got perfect octaves, bass moving up, soprano's moving up, but they're saying it's good. Why is that one good? So soprano didn't leap. Soprano moved by step. Yep. So just those two parts. It's still kind of exposed, but because the sopranos, again, moving by step, it's not drawing, it feels smoother transition going into that interval. All right, questions about direct octaves, direct fifths? I'm pretty sure I was sleeping when my teacher explained this to me, because this was one that was like, really took me a long time to try to understand, and I still didn't quite get it. Again, if you're going like through this on your own, like later today, tomorrow, or later in the week, definitely recommend checking out that Dr. B video. And listen to the way he explains it. Go through the book again, read it, but look at the examples. I think it'll come back to you, but yeah, I think that Dr. B video would also be a great way to just kind of recap everything. Yeah, of course, the book loves to give examples of when composers do the wrong things. And I'm not always a fan. Think, yeah, okay, they're always breaking the rules, but we're trying to teach the correct way of doing this. All right, so let's take a look at, this is in the self-test on page 79. We're going to look at this example here at 4 parts. We're going to look at all the voice pairs and state what type of motion, whether it's static, S key, oblique, O, contrary, C, similar, S, and parallel motion, P. Alright, so we have our 6 voice pairs there. We have our example, so bass and soprano. Here's our bass, here's our soprano. Soprano stays on a B, bass moves down to a G, what type of motion is that?
Under the oblique.
Oblique, so we're gonna put a bold there. And then we have the soprano moving up to C, the bass moving down to E. Type of motion would that be? Contrary, so that's C there, and then our bass is moving up, soprano is moving down. Contrary again, right? So another C. Now we look at our bass and our alto. Bass is moving down, alto moving up. Contrary, bass moving down, alto stays. Oblique, bass is moving up, alto moves down. Contrary again. Bass and tenor, right here. Bass moves, tenor stays. Oblique, bass moves down, tenor moves up. Contrary, bass moves up, tenor moves down. Contrary again. Does everybody understand basically what this is about, what we're doing? This is important to not, I guess, seems like a lot of students kind of miss this step or forget about it, or maybe they're not here on the day that we talk about it. Because later then, when we're looking for parallel motion, let's say here, is that, let's just look for, is any parallel motion. And this was written by Bach, I think, or at least an adaptation of that. Yeah, this was written by Bach. The, directions just ask us to look for parallel motion, whether it's objectionable or not objectionable, just any kind of parallel motion, where do we see it? Yeah, Carter?
Between the soprano and the alto and the second measure.
Yeah, right away, that kind of caught your attention, that's cool, good.
Take care of the, no.
The best way to find this though, start with your voice pairs. You know, if I was starting at the bottom, let's say tenor and bass, all right, we have oblique motion again, contrary motion, contrary motion, contrary motion, contrary motion, no parallel motion. Bass and alto, similar motion. Similar motion. Oblique motion. Contrary motion. Contrary motion. Oblique motion. No parallel. Alright? Bass and soprano. Contrary. Similar. Contrary. Contrary. E to G is a third, D to F is also a third. They're both moving by step down in the same direction. This would be parallel thirds. Then we have contrary motion. Alright, so we found parallel thirds there. If we continue with our, we'll go with tenor and alto. I don't know, for some reason, I always start with the bottom up. I guess it's the same way with my arrow. So I just start with the lowest voices and then work my way up. So then tenor and alto are at a third apart, but it's oblique motion, oblique motion, oblique motion. Alto's moving down, tenor's moving down, but the tenor's moving by a step and the alto's moving by a skip. That's similar motion. Here they're both moving up, tenor's skipping up or leaping to a fifth, alto's only skipping, so that's also similar. And then we have oblique motion again. Tenor and soprano. Looks like oblique motion, tenor's moving down, soprano's moving down, tenor's moving by step, soprano's moving by step, parallel motion. G to B, F to A, F sharp to A, still thirds, parallel thirds. Tenor's moving down, soprano's moving down, they're both moving by step. Once again, parallel motion. parallel motion again. So, A to F is a 6, B to G is a 6, so it's parallel 6. So Vox got some parallel motion in here, but no offensive or objectionable parallel motion, no fifths or octaves. Our alto and our soprano, we notice parallel motion there. Not here, because it's oblique. Alto stays, soprano moves. Looks like they're both moving. A to G is a step, D to B though is a skip, so it's not parallel motion, similar motion. And we get contrary motion, and we get oblique motion. So that's how you gotta go through all these parts, these voice pairs like this when you're looking for any objectionable parallel motion. And that's what we're gonna be doing in the next example. Dun, dun, dun. All right. We're given this example here, and they tell us there's some things wrong with this example. Can we find where these things are? So we need to find parallel octaves, we need to find parallel fifths, we need to find a direct fifth, contrary fifths, and a spacing error. So let me blow that up a little bit bigger so you can see it. All right. Okay, do I try it on your own, or do you want to go through it? What are you looking for? Again, I can write them up on the board. What we're looking for. We're looking for parallel octaves, parallel fifths. My shorthand, parallel octave, the parallel lines, parallel octave, parallel fifth, direct octave. I don't really have a shorthand for that, so that's just direct fifth. Direct fifth, contrary, I just write C on my fifth, spacing error. Sometimes I'll just put SP. Alright, so these are the errors we're looking for. found, who has found the direct, or I'm sorry, parallel fifths? Not everybody here? What about the parallel octaves? Spacing there? The direct fifth. That one's a little bit trickier to find. The contrary fifth. That one's a little tricky to find too. I'll give you a couple more minutes. Give you a moment. It's a tricky one. That answers it exactly what.
Oh, that one.
So if you get home, later, check it out.
Use 4 out of 5 is the way of writing down. I
Yeah.
remember where I found it.
Yeah. I'll give you one more.
What is the direct fifth?
We'll review. I told you, those couple of them are like the unequal fifths, direct octave, direct fifth, a little bit harder to like
Just
cement, yeah, cement, memorize and on it. But a few more examples like this, a few more, some homework, we'll be good with it.
I'm gonna say if it's contrary, because it's kind of, say split, it's maybe like that.
Yeah. Same with parallel
Or
fifths.
parallel.
Yeah, and that, I think the contrary fifth means the same thing as parallel fifths. Oh, yeah?
That's my last week.
Good. This is your last class?
Yeah.
Oh, awesome. You have to take an exam?
No, it's basically just a lecture series.
Okay.
That's kind of class. The class, the
Yeah.
homework.
Yeah.
Show up and listen
that I know why you mark those two notes as being in error. Okay, so that was number one. Number two, parallel fifths. Was Andrew.
The first two beats the base as front.
Yeah, first two beats. So D and A is a perfect fifth, and then E to B is also a perfect fifth, moving in the same direction, parallel motion. So again, I'd either just draw a line between the two, connect them, or circle them, and write 2 below it. Alright. Let's skip 3 and 4 and find the spacing error. Where's the spacing error?
Third, number, second.
Round out, so. Way I usually will do that, again, you can circle those two notes. I'll put like a little bracket, or you can put even just a line between them, just some indication of that, these two notes. And then, this is 5, so I write a 5 above it to indicate that that's the spacing there. Alright, direct fifths. Andrew.
I got the third measure of base as soprano, first two beats.
Okay, so if you're asked to find a direct fifth or direct octave, first thing, right away, it narrows it down to one voice pair. All it's gonna be is between the bass and the soprano. So right off the bat, you don't have to worry about the alto, or if there were a tenor part, you don't have to worry about that. Just look at the bass and the soprano. And then what you're doing is looking for if they're moving in the same direction, and the soprano is skipping. Like, alright, they're moving in the same direction, we already identified that as parallel fifths. Here we're moving in contrary motion. Alright, here we're moving up, and they're at an octave, but the soprano's not skipping or leaking into it. Here, we already identified that as parallel octaves. Here we have oblique motion. Here we have contrary motion. Alright, now we have similar motion again. The resulting interval is a fifth, and the soprano's leaping into it. Doesn't matter if the bass is moving by step or skipping or leaping, doesn't matter. It's the soprano. So yes, right here, again, I'm going to circle the bass and the soprano, and I'd write number 3 for direct fifth. Okay, so direct fifths, direct octaves are only going to be between the bass and soprano, and then you look for similar motion and the soprano leaping. Direct octave or direct fifth, then the resulting interval will be, in this case, a fifth, because it's a direct fifth. Alright. Contrary fifths. This one was trickier just because of the way it was written. We have the contrary one. So you have perfect fifths between two voices, and they move to perfect fifths, but they move in opposite direction in the same two voices. Are they right?
So the contrary fifths, they aren't necessarily in the soprano or the bass.
Could be soprano bass, could be
Okay, so it could be anything. So is it the
any of the
first
voice
measure?
pairs, yep.
Is it the first measure?
First measure,
Oh wait, no, that's similar to my bad.
yeah, here would, well, that's parallel motion, so that would be our parallel fifth.
Oh, I was looking at something. I was looking at the bass is on A and some of that's on E, but contrary.
Yeah.
I found it.
Is it soprano and bass, second to third key of the third measure?
Alright, so soprano, or soprano bass, or fifth part, A So G to D is a perfect fit. The bass moves up, alto moves down, D to A is a perfect fit. So yes, this was a little disguised, but it's still, it's a good example though. Cause yeah, we got, perfect fits in contrary motion. Yeah, good job, Isaiah. That one was definitely trickier. Would have been easier if it was a quarter note D and another quarter note D. I think everybody would probably seen it a lot quicker. But sometimes music isn't written. Okay, so homework. It's gonna be page 39. Should be able to do all of that. The first example is just finding the type of motion. The little lines above each chord is for lead sheet symbols, I think. Yeah, lead sheet symbols and the blanks above. So analyze the type of chord. So you got B flat, D, F, E flat, would be a B flat major, triad. That's usually when you write the lead sheet symbol above it, and then analyze the motion between all the voice pairs. Letter B, label the chords in the following example using Roman numerals. And then label any parallel motion you find. So looking at all the voice pairs. And then I'll have you look on page 40. Letter C. Do the best you can. You know, see if you find all 5 of them. Great. If you can only find a couple of them, just do the best you can. We'll go through it in class on one second. It'll be interesting to see how many of them you get. It'll probably depend on how much time you got to spend on it, but just, again, do the best you can. So A, B, and C, page 39 and 40. And I'll collect any homework that you might have for This making sense? No? Yeah. I don't know how to see that.
Yeah.
Good. Alright.
That's your group work. So, tomorrow, I'm going to Sim for my business.
Okay. Oh, awesome.
So, I was wondering if there was anything, wasn't given the opportunity, that I could check out. That you know, or like questions I should ask.
What's the visit? Who is it through the school, is it through like youth program?
It's-
School of home?
They do, the school does transfer students, visit, they do a bunch of transfer students, and then they look at your transfer, all that stuff. So, other than that, I haven't really pulled out too much. But, like I said, given the opportunity,